Thank you everyone for joining us today for something to talk about at the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. I'm so glad to see everyone here. We've got a great group. I'm also so delighted to present Maggie Christofferson, who is the, Maggie, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the education coordinator with the...
Yes.
Perfect. So an education coordinator with the Alzheimer's Association. And Maggie's going to be speaking to us today about effective communication strategies. So without further ado, Maggie, I'm going to turn the mic over to you. And I know you've got something to share on your screen, so you're welcome to start that whenever you're ready.
I do. So, hi, good morning. And like was just shared, my name is Maggie Christofferson, and a little bit about my background. I have been a caregiver since 1996. I got a bachelor's degree in social work from UW, and I taught caregiving classes for the state of Washington for about 8 years. And I've been with the association now for almost 3 years. And what I know about communication is you can never stop learning how to communicate. You can never reach the end of learning how to be a better communicator. I remember when I was teaching caregiving classes, we would have these conferences where people would come in and they would teach us stuff. And I remember one time we had a communication class and myself and another instructor were grumbling, what are they going to teach us? We teach this, that kind of thing. And, of course, I learned something. And so, our communication, how we communicate with people changes because we're always communicating with different people. And when we talk about communication, when it comes to Alzheimer's or other dementias, our skill level really needs to be enhanced. When we say, let's communicate, when we talk about how to communicate, we're talking about verbal communication, we're talking about nonverbal communication, we're talking about behavior, we're talking about gestures and body language and facial expressions and tone. We're talking about written communication, so emails and texts and letters. And we're talking about those kind of micro communications, right? Where people, sigh or their body posture. So communication can come in so many different forms. And the reason we communicate is so we can send and receive messages. And we send and receive messages so we get our wants and needs met. We send and receive messages so we can express ourselves, so we can get knowledge, so we can be understood. And when we're talking about somebody that's living with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, the ability to send and receive messages as the disease progresses changes. It changes when we go through those stages. So it's not just that somebody living with Alzheimer's has a hard time sending messages, right? Has a hard time speaking, has a hard time being understood, has a hard time organizing what they want to say and saying it. They're also having a hard time receiving messages. So your brain is doing a lot of work when you're having a conversation with somebody, especially if you're having a conversation with multiple people. Your ear is hearing what is being said and it's sending those signals to your brain. Your brain is sending those neurons all the way through your brain to the different centers where the language is and where we process. And it happens in a second. And then we have to respond. And that can be really difficult when someone has Alzheimer's and other dementias, especially in those early stages, middle and late stages. So I'm just going to kind of give a brief overview of how these changes take place in these stages, and then we'll go through on a deeper level. So in the early stage of Alzheimer's disease, oftentimes people can cover the fact that they're having communication issues, especially if you're not seeing them very often or it's just a brief visit. And sometimes in those early stages, people aren't having a heck of a lot of communication issues. But in that early stage, they can still convey thoughts and feelings through language. So that early stage is really important to start having some conversations about decisions on future care. So when someone is still able to say what they want, what they don't want, what they need, what they want their care to look like, it's really important to start having those conversations. But this is also a stage where people may start to misinterpret what other people say. My stepmom has Alzheimer's and has had it for 3 years. And I have cared for a lot of people with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, but I've never had a family member have it. I've never had a personal connection. And so now I see it a little bit differently. And one of the things that we started to notice is that my dad would say something like one time he said, we need to go clean the attic sometime, just like we need to clean the garage, like we say, right? Oh my gosh, it's such a mess. We need to do this. He came home later that day and she's got everything out of the attic. And he said, what are you doing? And she said, well, you told me I had to clean the attic. You said that I had to clean the attic. And so I started cleaning the attic. So it's a really good idea to understand that in these early stages, when people misinterpret what others say, we don't have to argue. Well, I didn't say that. Well, that's not what I said, right? We can just kind of see, what's going to happen for next time. Our middle stage, people are still using basic words and sentences, and depending on how the day is going, depending on the stress level, depending on how much sleep somebody's had, depending on whether their routine has changed, some days are better than others. So the middle stage kind of is more fluid. Sometimes it looks like people are in the early stages. Sometimes it looks like they're in the mid stages, and it really matters kind of what type of day it is. But in this stage, sometimes when people are receiving messages, when people are trying to understand what's being said to them, they're going to rely more on tone, facial expressions, and body language than actual words. If their brain is having a hard time understanding words, understanding vocabulary, they're just not retrieving it, they're going to start relying more on other forms of communication. Late stage. So people in late stages still respond to sound. They're still going to respond to you talking, not all the time. It may not seem like it, but I used to do some end of life caregiving, and one of the things that was taught to me was, sound is our last sense to go. People can hear and tell right before they go. So really making sure people are still getting as much sound as they need. So through you talking to them, through singing, through songs, through music, through reading to them. And we can use the 5 senses, and we can always use our body language to connect, because our goal is to connect as much as possible. So next slide. All right, so communication in the early stages, the changes that you may notice is difficulty finding the right words. And in the beginning, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. Every one of us has a hard time finding the right word, right? I mean, how many times have you just watched a movie and you can't remember the title? Or, you have a favorite band and you can't remember their name. But then a couple hours later, or a couple minutes later, you remember it. Well, that's not what's happening to the person living with Alzheimer's disease. The word that they want, they are not able to find, and it's oftentimes not coming back later. So this will increase. And it also looks like, instead of, like, if I needed the vacuum cleaner, but I couldn't think of the word vacuum cleaner, I might ask a family member to bring me that, thing you push and it sucks up stuff. So I'm using descriptive terms to try to figure out how I can get somebody to understand what I'm saying. I could tell somebody, oh, I'm cold. Bring me one of those things that you wrap around yourself. And so the words and the language just starts to become really descriptive instead of being able to actually name what you're looking for. The other thing that happens is people will start to call everything, that thingamajiggy, the whatchamacallit, you know what I'm talking about. And as they lose those words, everything starts to be called the same thing. People are going to have a harder time speaking and responding, so they're going to take longer. Remember, your brain is really going through a pretty difficult process. Communication is a lot more complicated than we think it is. So when we are talking to someone and when we are waiting for someone to respond, it's really important to just slow down. If you're asking a question and they're not having an answer, wait 4 or 5 seconds, wait 7 or 8 seconds, just wait, because it's going to take them longer. A lot of people start to withdraw from conversations, and this is really normal. Their brain is doing a lot of work to maintain these conversations, and it's frustrating and it's embarrassing and it's shameful when you're standing there and you can't remember the right word. And so many people just stop talking as much because it's tiring and it's hard. And they also oftentimes will start struggling with decision making and problem solving. And one of the things that, for instance, when I was a caregiver and when I was teaching caregiving and I was talking to folks that were taking care of loved ones with Alzheimer's, I would say, stop asking if you're hungry, because the person's oftentimes going to say no. And then if you say, well, what would you like to eat? They are going to struggle to decide what they want to eat. So it really helps to just make them a little snack and say, I made you something. And it's, of course, something that they like, something that they prefer. But my point is that is so different than how we, really would approach anybody. We would always say, are you hungry? We would always say, what would you like to eat? That gives people respect. That gives people independence. Of course, you're going to ask somebody what they want to eat, right? I mean, but when someone's dealing with Alzheimer's, the decision-making skills are so stressful that oftentimes it's just better to say, here, I made you something. And we do that with my stepmom, where there's about 4 or 5 things that she likes to eat right now. And for a while, it was driving my dad crazy. He wanted her to eat way, way more of a variety as she used to. We've gotten him to just calm down on that. And if she wants grilled cheese and macaroni and cheese and cereal, it's better than not eating, right? So really just kind of looking at, struggling with decision making, how can we make that a little bit easier? Was there a question? Or did somebody have a comment?
Well, I am experiencing, my husband is in a Madrona house, and he has Lewy body disease. And my good friend Flory has written a good book about this, what she went through as a caretaker. But I've had to change something just recently. I've noticed that the year we've spent without these poor fellas on our arm, we've had to adapt to windows, the masks, and everything. And he has changed. And I really think it has affected him deeply. It seemed to have rushed his inability to communicate as well. So he doesn't talk much. When I'm with him, I try to stay in the humorous zone because he relates to that well. And then he suddenly reminds himself of what was. I forgot my question. How's that?
That's okay. If it comes back to you, just raise your hand.
Well, I think this is what I'm going to say. Everything he is the director of his own language now, and I follow him.
No, I like that.
Make me follow, make him do what I need to do. So if he wants to say, I've got an itch on the top of my head, I said, I just found out I had one too, and we kind of go together on this thing. I don't try to direct him anymore. Because he stops talking.
That's great, Venera. I love that you are just connecting with him where he's at, and you're joining his reality and you're following him. And then you guys are still able to connect. And that's the point of communication.
Yes.
Right? So that, oh man. Class over, everybody. That's it. Sometimes our videos have been a little bit finicky lately, and actually, there we go. Okay, so what the video was talking about is making sure that in these early stages that we are having conversations about how that person wants their care to go, how they want, what they want to have happen, how they want to be taken care of, where they would like to live, who they would like to have take care of them. While they can still have these conversations, it's really important to have them. And I can tell you, I've cared for folks that have gotten to make those decisions, and I've cared for people that haven't. And it really seems that the people that have that choice in their life do emotionally, it seems like they do a little bit better. The other thing I see, and I used to see this with families when I taught caregiving classes, is a lot of times the siblings would be fighting, or they would be really upset, and somebody would say, well, I think mom wants this. Well, I don't think she wants it. I think she would want it this way. And when someone has the ability to say what they want and the ability to plan, then nobody has to wonder. We just carry out their wishes, right? And so I used to see people in anguish saying, I don't think I'm doing this right. I don't think this is what they want. And when we can ask people and have those hard conversations that they're not easy to have, but then we know that we're doing what they would like us to do. And so that's something to think about. So connection in the early stages. The way to connect is to ask directly how to help with communication. So one of the things you can do is you can say in whatever way feels comfortable for you. But I see that you're kind of having a hard time with words. I see that you're struggling a little bit. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to jump in and fill in the word for you, or do you want me to wait? I used to work with folks with spinal cord injuries who oftentimes also had traumatic brain injuries, making speech sometimes slurred, sometimes difficult for people to understand. And I would have that conversation with them. What do you want me to do? When someone can't understand you, do you want me to jump in? Do you want me not to jump in? And sometimes people would say, I want you to jump in. And sometimes people would say, do not jump in at all. Let me do it. And it was really important to have those conversations, because we don't know. We don't know if we're making it worse by jumping in, or we're making it worse by not jumping in. So having that conversation and knowing that conversation is going to change in different circumstances. Maybe when your loved one is with family, they don't mind that they're struggling with their words. They're comfortable with those people. It's okay. But if they're out in public, maybe they do mind. So it kind of really matters where you're at. We want to keep our sentences really clear, really straightforward, making sure that we're making it as easy as possible for people to understand. And we want to leave plenty of time for conversation. So we can't rush folks that are having a hard time with their language. It's not fair. It doesn't work. It makes people, even more anxious. And the other thing, really, really important, is if we are talking about that person, if we're having conversations about that person, they need to be included. They absolutely need to be included. And even though it's tempting to talk about that person if they're in a different part of the house, or if you're on the phone and you think they can't hear or whatever, it's just a really bad idea. We should, we wouldn't do it to anybody else. We shouldn't do it to our loved ones that are suffering with this disease. And, in all my years of caregiving, people can always tell when you're talking about them. They always know when you're talking about them. And I had the benefit of being a presenter at an early stage memory loss conference. It was amazing. I learned so much. And one of the things I got to do was I got to sit in on a session with just the folks that were suffering from early stage memory loss. And one of the things they said is they talk about me like I'm not here. I hear them talk about me all the time. And you could just hear the shame and embarrassment and pain in their voice. So it's hard not to, and sometimes you do have to talk about your loved one like they're not there. If you're at the doctor's office and the doctor's asking you and for some reason they can't answer, or you need to tell somebody something. I used to have to sometimes answer for clients, and I would just say, I'm going to talk about you. I would just bring it up. Just be open about it. I'm going to talk about you right now. Here I go. Rather than trying to hide it. Oh, go ahead.
Hey, I've got an example that happened to me and Ed. Just recently, we had a little bit of a situation with the whole family, and I got my foot in my mouth. So I always try to present a very calm picture to Ed when I'm with him, and I hadn't burdened him at all with any problems. And I decided that I was up against the wall and I needed his support, even if it wasn't going to be there the way I might have imagined. So I told him about what happened, and he perked up. He sat up straight, and out of his mouth came out the 40-year-old mind that said, I'm glad you came to me. Don't forget, I'm still part of the family. And I so appreciate what you're doing right now, is to give me this information. And then he started telling me, how I should handle this. But the whole idea was he wanted to be part of this thing, not out in the, just like you said, Maggie, you said it well. This business of not including people and letting them be who they are, in charge. And I told him, I said, listen, Ed, I'm glad you responded this way. You're still head of the family. Do you know that? And he just lit up.
Oh, that's so great. I really love that. I love that you shared that.
It was a good answer for me. He said to me, listen, if you don't know yourself, you shouldn't be advising others in the family.
That's great. That's awesome. That's such a good example.
Thank you.
Can we go to the next slide? All right. So we want to avoid making assumptions. So we don't know if that person wants us to speak for them or not. We also don't know if they're, going to have a really good day or a really not good day. So it maybe sometimes they would need you to speak for them, but they're having a really good day where they don't need it. So we want to avoid making assumptions. We always want to speak directly to that person. And when you are out in public, when you are going to the doctor, when you are at family gatherings, as the disease progresses, sometimes people have the tendency to ask you the questions, to speak to you. And we really want to remember that that person needs to be spoken to directly. So communicate in the way that is most comfortable for them. For some people, it's in person. For some people, it's the phone. For some people, it's email. As the disease progresses, phone and email are going to get a little bit difficult. So just trying to find a way to connect. Laugh together. You know, this disease is a difficult diagnosis. It is really hard to accept that this is going to happen to your loved one. But life is still funny. Life is still happening. Things are still funny. And we can find the humor in things. Be honest, laugh together, stay connected. That's where we need to go, is to that connection. Okay, next slide. So in the middle stages, if there were communication issues in the early stages, they're probably going to get worse. So you're going to see an increased difficulty in finding the right word. One of the things that I noticed in our family was my stepmom at first, it was, a word or two every, I don't know, conversation. And then it was, 8 to 10 words a conversation. And, now it's quite a bit more. So you'll see an increased difficulty. They may use familiar words repeatedly. So they may use the same word for different things. Instead of saying, can you hand me that spoon, to eat some cereal or eat some soup, they may say, can you hand me that cup? Or a fork is for everything, or a plate means the same thing. So avoid correcting them. They're not going to remember what it's called anyway. And then it just calls attention to the fact that they're using the wrong word. They might invent new words to describe familiar things. They may easily lose their train of thought. And one of the difficulties is if we lose our train of thought, we can often say, well, what was I saying? What was I talking about? Oh, I was talking about how I, went to the mall and they didn't have my favorite jeans anymore. Oh, yeah. But somebody with Alzheimer's may have a hard time tracing it back. They may speak less frequently than before, and they may communicate through behavior rather than words. So if there are major or sudden changes, for instance, if somebody's short-term memory gets much worse, if their ability to talk gets markedly worse, and these changes are quick and sudden, it's time to go to the doctor. Oftentimes somebody, especially if they're older, living with this disease, a urinary tract infection can make the symptoms worse. And so any kind of change in baseline, any kind of change in what's normal for that person is always a good indication that it's time to go be seen. So let's see the next slide. And Beverly, we'll just go to there we go. So Beverly talked about how this was a journey that she was on with her husband, Amos. And her goal was really just to stay connected to him and to remember that the act of just being together and connecting and holding hands and being with him was the way that they were now connecting rather than doing a lot of talking. So our goal is to connect, right? And so it's a really good idea in the middle stage to approach the person from the front, say who you are, and call the person by name. So this may not be necessary if this is, your spouse or your loved one, your mom or your dad in the middle stages, but it may be necessary if you don't see this person very often or if you're in a different context. It's always a good idea to just say, hi, and then say your name. Hi, Joan, it's me, Maggie, because it takes a lot of pressure off somebody. We had a family event this weekend and my aunt was there, and my stepmom hasn't seen my aunt in, I don't know, 2 years, she doesn't see her. She never sees her. You know, they're not close. They don't talk to each other. And she asked my dad, who is that woman that was sitting by me? And he got really upset. But it's like, why would she know her? She doesn't see her every day. She has Alzheimer's. You know, this is not a shock that she doesn't recognize this person. And really what my aunt should have said is hi, Leslie, it's Diane. And given her that gift of not having to wonder, not having to guess, right? Not having to think, I know I should know this person, but I don't know who they are. And now I'm anxious, and now I'm nervous they're going to quiz me, right? It's just, especially if the context has changed. If you see your sister-in-law at, you know, your house every Sunday, she's probably going to know who you are. But if you see her out in public or at somebody else's house, the context isn't there, and she may not know who you are. So, you know, just to give them kind of a heads up. Yes, Reed.
Yes, my mother-in-law had Alzheimer's, and she would often respond, you know, you'd say something like, hi, it's Reed, I'm here to visit. And she'd say, I know that. And you'd do it anyway, just because she might not know that, but that was her way of kind of covering.
Oh, yes.
Because she knows she should know that.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And my grandma had dementia because she had a cerebrovascular disease. And I would say, hi, Cecil, it's Maggie. And she would most of the time, like Reed just said, she'd say, I know who you are. But sometimes relief would wash over her face because I would come in the room, and at first she didn't know who I was, but I told her. And my sister used to quiz her. Do you know who I am? And I'd say, knock it off. No, she doesn't know who you are. Leave her alone. Just tell her. What is this quiz show? What is the point of that? It drove me nuts. So we always want, you know, we're going to get at eye level, of course, if we're talking to somebody, because we don't want to look like we're towering over them. We want to avoid criticizing, correcting, or arguing. And this is a huge one. People's memories, you know, what's funny, I was listening to a story on NPR about memory, and I just was fascinated because they said that if you have a memory and you tell the story, you tell people, you know, let's say you went to France and you got, you know, lost somewhere and somebody stole your money. Every time you tell the story changes a little bit. The memory changes a little bit. You don't know it. It's a function of your brain. And so when somebody has Alzheimer's, the memories that they have are not going to retain the exact clarity that you remember that they should have. So maybe they say, oh, I went to Germany when I was 22, and you know they were 19. Don't pipe up and say you were 19, because who cares? Right? Who cares if they were 19 or 25, you know, or maybe they say, oh, gosh, I worked as a logger one summer. It was so hard. What's the point of saying, no, you didn't? You could just say instead, well, what was it like? The folks aren't lying. The brain does not like to have blank spots for memories. And so it just goes ahead and fills them in. And it just fills them in, and we say, oh, okay, that sounds good. What was that like? Because it doesn't work, and it's difficult. It's difficult. Pay attention to your tone. And here's the deal. Here's what I learned as a caregiver very early on. You cannot fake patience. You actually have to have the patience. I thought I could fake it, and people could tell I was not patient because I didn't have any. I had to go find it. So if you're feeling irritable, if you're feeling annoyed, that's totally normal when you're caring for somebody with Alzheimer's. This is one of the most difficult jobs that caregivers have, is to care for folks with dementia. But paying attention to your tone, trying to find that patience, because they can pick up on that. And take your time. Again, communication isn't going to be able to be rapid fire like it once was. We just can't communicate that way anymore. So did somebody have a question? Comment?
I just want to make a comment about what you said. Maggie, about don't correct. We should be doing that all our life, not correcting each other, because we'll eventually learn if we're wrong. But
That's a good point.
you know, we are great at making people feel bad. We practice often.
That's a good point, Manera.
Oh, thank you, Maggie. You are inspiring. You are very good.
Thank you. Well, Reed, do you want to go to the next slide? Okay, so what Rebecca was talking about is her mom had Alzheimer's disease, and she and her mom, you know, she used to, her mom would repeat herself, repeat the question, repeat the story, and she would get annoyed. And she would say, Mom, I already told you that 7 times. And her mom would say, no, you didn't. Or, Mom, you already told me that 7 times. And she would say, no, you didn't. I never told you. And she would argue. And finally, she learned to just not say anything. Okay, it's a new story. It's a new conversation. It's new. So to connect, it's really important to join that person's reality. So we have to really keep that respect and empathy in mind. Really making sure that you're assessing the person's needs, letting the person know that you hear their concerns. A lot of folks with Alzheimer's will get anxious about wanting to go home, needing to go someplace, being late for work, being late for picking up their kids. I got to do this training in a long-term care facility, and I learned so much from these caregivers. And they had a client every day at 12 o'clock, she would start getting upset and saying, my kids are coming home for lunch. I've got to make sandwiches. My kids are coming home for lunch. I got to make sandwiches. And they tried everything to get her to calm down. Finally, somebody just got her some bread, got her some peanut butter, and let her make some sandwiches. And she was fine. She'd make 3 or 4 sandwiches every day at 12 o'clock. Somebody would eat them. And they'd go about their business. She'd be calmed down. There was another gal who used to be a nurse, and she was a nurse manager, and so she would just drive the nurses bonkers at this long-term care facility, telling them they were doing everything wrong. So then the director put on a blazer one day and went out and told her, thank you so much, but I've got it. And she would just say, okay, and go sit down and calm down. And she had to do it every day. So she never could take the blazer home because she always had to have the blazer to be very official, to tell her it worked. I mean, why not? Right? So provide brief answers and respond to the emotion behind the statement. So if someone's saying, you know, I need to go home, I need to go home, I need to go home, you know, maybe they're uncomfortable. Maybe that's their way of saying, I'm uncomfortable, or I need to sit down, or I'm feeling like I need a blanket or some socks or a comfortable movie that I know, or a food that tastes good to me, or a pillow that smells good. You know what I mean? Something that makes you feel at home, something that makes you feel, you know, like you're good. So it's the emotions behind the statement rather than the statement. Telling somebody you are home doesn't help because they don't feel like they're home, right? They don't feel like they are, so it doesn't help. Okay, next slide. So again, short sentences and basic words. It's really important in this middle stage that we try to have one-on-one conversations. If it's a big group gathering, if there's more than, 3 or 4 people there, it's really important to remind people, if you want to speak to your loved one, have a sitting down, trying to have a one-on-one conversation, trying to avoid big group conversations because they're too difficult. We can try to limit distractions, right? We can try to turn down the radio, turn down the TV, anything that's kind of distracting them. Be patient and offer a guess or fill in the words if they want you to. So if they want, and sometimes I don't even see the point. If I know for instance, what my stepmom is saying, if I know her sentiment, if I know kind of her tone and where she's going, just standing there and talking and saying, oh yeah, I totally get it, or I agree, or whatever, just being with her seems to be good enough. All right, next slide. So sometimes you're going to have to provide visual cues and gestures, right? So you're going to have to show how something works or where something goes, maybe over and over again. We can write things down for people if they can still read. If they're having a harder time reading, that may not work, but labeling things seems to help. You know, they changed the garbage colors in Tacoma a couple years ago, and it really threw her for a loop. She could not remember. So we had to write down on the garbage what was what. We can put answers into our questions. So, you know, if we're trying to figure out what the person wants to eat, you know, do you want a sandwich or would you like some soup? Do you want to go to the store now or do you want to go to the store in a half an hour? That also works with folks that are really reticent to do activities of daily living. Saying to someone that's not real hip on showering anymore or brushing their teeth, do you want to shower? Oftentimes you're going to get no. Do you want to brush your teeth? No. Do you want to eat? No. Do you want to take your meds? No. And you're just like, oh, that's fun. We're not going to do anything. But instead, if you say, would you like to take your meds now or in a half hour? Well, that's a choice. Now I get a choice. You're right. You want to shower now or you want to shower after lunch? Now I get a choice. So that really helps to put answers in the questions and make sure there's just two choices. Repeat as often as needed. And one of the things that the long-term caregivers told me that has really helped me and helped a lot of folks that I've talked to is expect to repeat yourself. Just expect it. Do not go into this conversation thinking, I am not going to say this 15 times. Do not go into this conversation thinking that you are not going to hear the story 12 times that you heard yesterday 42. It's just not going to happen. That part of the brain that is responsible for saying to the person, you told this story already, the hippocampus that remembers that recently learned information and recently said information, is not working. And it just doesn't work. And so I find it really helpful to just expect to repeat. And then if it's just too much, change the subject. Get them talking about something else they like to talk about. Get them doing an activity. Get them outside, change the subject, change the setting, take a break, have somebody else come in and spell you from hearing that story, but expect to hear that repetition. And avoid quizzing. They're not going to remember, right? They're not going to remember. And just because they forgot your name doesn't mean that you weren't special, that you weren't the love of their life, that you weren't their favorite grandchild, that you weren't their mom. It just means they can't remember your name right now. And it's painful, but it doesn't mean that they don't love you. It just means their brain can't find your name. And it's hard, but they still love you and you're still connected. So remember joining that person's reality. Remember to reassure them that you hear and that you understand. Focus on their feelings, not on their facts, right? We got a lot of stories of people, I can still drive. I want to drive. You can't tell me I can't drive. That is the feeling of being dependent, the feeling of not being an adult, the feeling of having your freedom taken away. And so we focus on those feelings, not on the facts. You know, I hear sometimes conversations of, you know, Dad, if you drove, you're going to kill somebody. Well, that may be, but the person still wants to drive. You know, I'm still going to want to drive when I probably shouldn't drive right now. I'm not that great of a driver. But, you know, if someone comes and takes away my ability to drive, I'm going to be pretty mad. And I'm going to assert that I have that right. So focus on our feelings, not on facts. So validate and redirect. And if any of you want a really great example of how to redirect, Go look up on YouTube Teepa Snow. Teepa Snow is like the dementia guru. She is just amazing. I've never met her. But when I first started presenting, people would always say, "Are you going to present like Teepa Snow?" And I'd be like, "What? I don't think so." And now I can definitely say, "No, I am not." But I can tell you to go look at her because she has amazing ideas for how to redirect people. She's just a genius. Okay, next slide. So in the late stages, communication is going to be really difficult. It's going to be really reduced to a few words, maybe just a few sounds. People are still going to be able to respond, but maybe not as well. So to connect, it's really important that if someone is nonverbal and they really don't have a lot of ways of connecting and expressing that they're uncomfortable or in pain or not feeling well, it's really important to start paying attention to body language. So we are going to watch people's faces. We're going to watch eyes. When people are in pain, their eyes tend to go wide or they tend to scrunch. They tend to rub things that hurt or hold things that hurt. People get agitated and move when things are in pain, when people are in pain, when something hurts. So checking for any signs of pain. If someone's irritated and annoyed, they might need to go to the bathroom. They may be hungry. They may be thirsty. It may be too bright. It may be too dark. Their clothes may be uncomfortable. Their surroundings may be uncomfortable. It may be too loud or too cold or too hot. So if you notice, if you're really checking those nonverbal signs of communication, you can really look at, okay, how can we make this person feel comfortable? Keep talking. Keep talking and use those 5 senses to communicate. We're going to go through these kind of quickly because we're a little bit short on time. So Sandra has a great video about how much her mother loved to have her hair brushed. And she would just brush her hair. And she'd just brush her hair for a half hour, 45 minutes. And her mother absolutely loved it. So connecting through touch. You know, sometimes people will like hand massages. They'll like to visit with animals. They like to just sit and have their hand held. Let's look at how to connect through sight. Sometimes bringing pictures, especially if you know what that person loved. I had a gal present for us a couple months ago, and she would make laminated picture books for people, and she would get their interest. So she had a guy that really loved old cars. So she just put a bunch of old cars in a book, and he would sit there and look at the old cars over and over again. You know, maybe it's dogs, maybe it's babies, maybe it's flowers, but those bright colors, and that gets neurons firing, right? Just to look at those pictures. Looking at photo albums, going bird watching, painting with watercolors. It is so soothing to paint, to just get those colors on the canvas. It doesn't have to be anything. Go sit outdoors together. Let's see the next one. Sound, familiar music. Music seems to be able to reach people in the very latest stage of this disease. And so any music that they really love, maybe songs or speeches in a person's native language, reading books or poetry, or just letting that person hear your voice. Okay. And smell. One of the things I would be so scared about if I got COVID was that I couldn't smell. I love to smell things. And I hope that, you know, when I get older, if I end up with Alzheimer's, I hope somebody gives me a bag of stuff to smell, because that just makes me so happy. So what is it that they like to smell? Is it herbs or spices? Is it essential oils? Is it flowers? Is it tea? Is it coffee? Who doesn't like to smell coffee? I mean, even if you don't like coffee, people like to smell it. And cook and feed food that a lot of people with Alzheimer's will lose their sense of smell, and then they lose their sense of taste. And then so it's really hard to give foods that people want to eat. Sometimes just frying onions and garlic can get people kind of get their senses going, but foods that are really fragrant and smell really good. And then taste. A lot of times people will want to eat the same, 4 or 5 foods. I say, what are you going to do? Cook things that people want to eat. If it's their favorite foods, sometimes people are having a hard time with swallowing, so really watch that. But giving them foods that they really like to eat. Okay. So again, in all stages of the disease, join the person's reality. Understand and accept what you can and cannot change. And you cannot change the fact that this person is progressing through this disease. We can only change our reaction to how they're progressing through this disease. The person is still there. They are not gone. It may feel like they're gone, but they are still there, and they need you to know they're still there. Remember to demonstrate respect. Always treat the person as an adult. They did not revert back to childhood. They're not like a baby. They're not like a kid. They are an adult that is going through a progressive disease that is altering their brain's ability to function. They are not a child. So really try to help meet their needs while you're still soothing and calming the person. And I think we've come to our time, and it's good because that's it. That's our presentation. One of the things I do want to say is we have a helpline, 1-800-272-3900. This helpline is staffed with master level social workers. It's available in 202 languages, and it is available 24 hours a day. It is not an emergency line. It is not a crisis line. You do not have to wait until there's a crisis or emergency to call them. You could call them 15 times a day if you want to. All they want to do is to be there to offer you resources, help, and support, and to help get you through this. That's our whole goal. That's the entire reason we exist. And so please call us. Please use that helpline. People do a lot better when they start to reach out for help, when they go to the support groups, when they go to the classes, when they go and they say, oh my gosh, this is so difficult. I need help. And then we get help and it gets a lot better. So let's see if there's any questions or comments.
Rose Alice is on this call, and she wrote a book about this experience with her husband.
Wow.
And it's a wonderful book, Mike and Me. And if you have the opportunity, anyone on this call might find it useful. Thanks, Rose Alice, for doing that.
I think we presented together in, was it who, at Martha's house?
Oh, I think we might have done that.
Yes, that was so long ago.
Yes. Your presentation was terrific today.
Oh, thank you.
I kept notes the whole time, and then I was getting tight on time, so I took my computer on top of the washer and dryer to do something at my desk. I figured I'd go off view for a little bit, but I heard every word, and in the middle of it, I dropped what I was doing, wrote down smell, and underlined it. I'm actually talking at North Kitsap Library on Wednesday night. And I just really like to be as current as I can, and I need to hear people like you, so I do a good job. So
well,
thank
you. Thank you. And thank you for writing that book. I remember your talk, and that book is really important.
Well, when I hear people, and of course, I'm like everybody who does this, you just think you could have done a better job. So that's the gift we all sort of have, so we just keep getting better, like you say, with communication and everything.
It never stops, and caregiving is hard. And I'm just so excited because it really seems like, I don't know if you guys have been watching the news lately, but they're talking about caregivers a lot. And they're talking about how people need help and people need support. And, I'm really excited that caregivers are finally getting some recognition. And I see the gal with the orange turtleneck. Go ahead.
Yes, Rosaline, you provided us wonderful program at the Rotary, I believe.
Yes, thank you.
And I saw you recently passing by, I remember about a couple months ago.
I wanted to just say, we have many people that are getting old that are not diagnosed even yet. So this may sound crazy, but it behooves us to treat everyone with respect and give them, if they're saying things that are not due well put together, we don't know what they are facing yet.
Yes.
So if we can be kind and good, that always helps.